Hi there, I'm Louis from Spitfire Audio, and I'm very much looking forward to introducing you to the first of our One Orchestra series. A little over a year ago, we released the BBC Symphony Orchestra Library, a profoundly creative collaboration with BBC Studios and the BBC Symphony Orchestra itself, with one goal in mind: to be the universal starting point for any and all composers, no matter the skill or experience. A complete and cohesive orchestra is contained within the BBC Symphony Orchestra Library, recorded at the revered Maida Vale Studios. Now, with 3 editions of the library available, Pro, Core, and our free version Discover, which are all interchangeable within the library's mode switching feature, learning, sharing, collaborating and creating music with that world-class orchestral sound hasn't been easier. With resources like the page linked below providing a hub of creativity, including things like templates, tutorials and demos from you, the community, by tagging your pieces with the hashtag OneOrchestra, as well as the Discover edition of the library being free, there's no better time to get involved and celebrate as we learn together and highlight each other's music in these videos. Now with the introductions out of the way, let's get started. Now I've got a little piece here that I initially wrote for our Abbey Road ONE Orchestral Foundations library, this time transferred into BBCSO Core. Now I was curious about how the libraries would compare to each other, the rooms they were recorded in, the sounds of the players, and the features baked into each library. Christian, one of the founders of Spitfire Audio, has done a fantastic video comparing the 2 libraries, which is linked below. This inspired me to get my hands dirty and explore the difference for myself. Before I play my piece, I just want to shed a little light on the Final Fantasy VII music, particularly the bombing mission music, as this inspired my BBCSO composition and the direction I wanted to take it. Now believe it or not, Final Fantasy VII is the 7th instalment of the popular video game franchise Final Fantasy. As the name suggests, the series revolves around fantasy as well as science fiction elements presented in the role-playing genre of video games. The 7th instalment was released a year before I was born in 1997 to critical acclaim, and that's partly due to the fact of composer Nobuo Uematsu's incredibly rich score, providing excitement, drama and heartfelt moments to the cyberpunk backdrop of Midgar and beyond. And here's the main theme. It's no surprise Uematsu had been called the Beethoven or John Williams of video game music, with his contributions to the Final Fantasy series frequently featuring in Classic FM's annual Hall of Fame. It's particularly inspiring as Uematsu has had no formal lessons in music, teaching himself piano at the age of 12 and citing Elton John as his biggest influence. He hasn't done too bad for himself, and it makes it all the more inspiring what Uematsu has achieved over his career as a video game composer. Now here's a snippet from the bombing mission music, which kicks off the story of Final Fantasy VII, as our heroes stage an attack on the villainous Shinra Corporation. What a way to open a story. I love the way Uematsu uses the running theme in the low strings and piano, as well as transforming it in other sections to keep the music alive and keep the audience on the edge of their seats. So with all this in mind, I've had a little go at creating a cue in the same sort of vein, and we'll be exploring how I've created and transformed the theme throughout the piece using the orchestra, as well as touching on the differences between the Abbey Road ONE Orchestral Foundations library and BBCSO Core. Let's give it a listen. Now, right off the bat, I've decided to slightly speed up the tempo of the BBC version of this piece, just to create a little bit more urgency. And like Uematsu, I decided to introduce a theme in the lower strings right at the beginning. Now, there are two important words to mention when talking about theme, and that's form and variation. In music, form indicates how a piece is broken down and structured, whether that's by bar, phrase, or passage. To put it simply, in relation to my piece, I'm using an ABA structure, and for us to use form to analyse the different themes, we'll be breaking it down by section and taking out all the significant phrases to see what themes are there and what they consist of. Once we've found our theme, we'll be taking a look at variation, how the theme varies throughout the piece, whether that's melodically, harmonically, or rhythmically. Now, going back to our strings in the introduction, you can hear our theme playing a sort of descending 1 bar long phrase. We'll call this our initial theme. By using a bit of chromaticism on the notes playing on the first beat of the bars, it allows the tension to build and sounds a little bit unresolved. Also, the descending shape of this theme implies a sense of hopelessness as we listen throughout the piece. You can hear chromaticism in all sorts of music used in a variety of different contexts. In the film and video game world, chromaticism can be found in the gloomy alleyways of Gotham as Danny Elfman guides us through Tim Burton's Batman. To the various missions 007 undertakes, particularly in John Barry's Bond scores. It can also be found in Alien Invasions, in which Hans Zimmer relies on chromaticism as Crisis 2's main theme. You'll find chromaticism everywhere, whether it's used as a passing note between chords or as a staple of a melodic theme. Chromaticism gives a bit more colour and flavour to the music. It's no wonder it became more commonly used with Romantic era composers. Let's go ahead and give our initial theme in BBCSO core a listen on the cello and bass. You can see our initial theme playing fast triplets throughout the whole of our intro, also being backed up by the flutes just before we get into that first section to really bolster up and give us a solid backbone for the piece. Comparing the BBCSO version to the Abbey Road version of this demo, it's really nice with BBC being able to split up all the instruments individually. While Orchestral Foundations is a great pre-orchestrated ensemble library, allowing you to quickly sketch out ideas and use Abbey Road's extensive mic collection to get that big Hollywood sound. It's quite a contrast sacrificing the mics in BBCSO core to get that individual and more crisper sound recorded at Maida Vale Studios, while there's still an element of cohesion as all the players are from the same orchestra. In the BBCSO libraries, there's a little bit more room to shape and cater for the sound, whereas Abbey Road sounds great out of the box, especially with those ensemble swells patches. Now let's move on to our first section. A few things to note in the first section is the introduction of our main melody, which is joining us in the violins and violas. And what's great is I'm really able to make use of BBCSO core's legato patches. That's where there's really nice smooth transitions between notes. If I just scroll down, you can see there's a little bit of call and response between our violin melodic theme and our brass section with the horns there, later joined by the trumpets. The call and response between the higher strings and our brass is inspired by Uematsu's Bombing Mission music, with there being call and response within the brass and also some woodwinds within that track. Our trombones and horns that make up the brass response actually borrow from our initial theme, However, the variation here is they're elongating it. That's what we call a rhythmical variation. You can see it's playing that descending pattern and also using the chromaticism as we've mentioned before. Being in the key of A minor and having that B flat there in the brass really adds to the unresolved tension as well as the descending motion. Let's remind ourselves of what I'm going to call our melodic theme in the violins and violas. There's a little bit of a harmonic twist in this melodic theme with the appearance of an F sharp, warping the character of our piece a little bit more towards a D major as opposed to the A minor that is rooted in. We can see the return of this melodic theme in the section after the brass interval, and the sequence starts the same, being led up by fifths. However, the second half of our string sequence actually starts to rise and continue into the brass's response before falling back to our key note of A. I guess you can say that implies a little bit of hope if you want to read into it. Nevertheless, we've got our brass section now being led by some punchy trumpets to keep things suppressed and centered around an A minor. I chose not to add a lot of reverb on the brass, as while there's no mic variations or the ability to use close mics as you can in the Pro and Abbey Road Orchestral Foundations library, I thought stripping back the reverb helps emulate that close sound and gives a bit more of an in-your-face kind of sound that I wanted when using core. One last thing to note in this first section of the piece is the ability for us to use timpani rolls in the BBCSO core library. Unlike my Abbey Road demo, where I had to emulate the timpani roll by playing it in really fast and using a velocity curve, so basically how hard it's being hit, in BBC Core I can simply just hold down a note and then use my mod faders to get that really nice dynamic timpani roll. It sounds like this. It sounds really epic, especially when you add a bunch of reverb to really enhance the power of the timpani. Now we move on to our 2-bar break, where the brass is taking centre stage and borrowing the chromaticism from our initial theme. After that, we move on to our second section where things get interesting. To contrast from our big bombastic opening, I decided to shrink things down and rely on our flutes and clarinets to take us through the opening to this second section. This is influenced again by Uematsu's sudden withdrawal of the orchestra about a minute into the bombing mission theme. Sounds like this. I feel like it really keeps the listener on their toes and keeps the music fresh with these unexpected moments. Here our flutes and clarinets play our initial theme with a slight ascension towards the end. Coupled with a newly introduced glockenspiel playing the first notes of the initial theme's triplets, we've got a much more playful vibe, giving us a momentary break from the action. Now we're properly into our second section. Nobuo is now creating a secondary melodic theme, which borrows heavily from the first. It does this by using legatos, allowing us to have a smooth transition between notes, with there also being a little interval between our second repeat, and the second repeat ending in an ascending pattern before being brought back down. This secondary theme also borrows from our first, with the intervals between notes being very conjunct or step-like. A second repeat also introduces this theme on the bassoon, as well as a xylophone, playing a syncopated rhythm before building everything back up to our final section. Let's give this section a listen. Now you may have heard the clarinet peeping through with a familiar sounding sequence. Throughout this second section, the clarinet plays a variation of our initial theme. It takes out a few notes and also wanders around, adding a few extra notes in a playful sort of vibe, while still restricting itself to the step-like movement and fast triplets. Here's how it sounds. Before a return to our first section for the final time, we have a 4-bar lead up. Our strings are reintroduced alongside a timpani after being teased earlier in the second section, and our cello and timpani alternate between our initial theme and the woodwind's variation of it, sounding like this. You can also hear our violins and violas being accompanied by our woodwinds and glockenspiel, playing an elongated rhythmical variation of our initial theme. And to point out again, the descending chromaticism was inspired by Uematsu's track. The flutes and xylophone then return with triplets and a swell in the brass to bring us into our final section. And here's how our final section sounds. Making the most of the dynamics by using the velocity in the shorts and the mod fader to automate the dynamics in the longs really helps our orchestra sound a lot more dynamic and unified as it's pulling out all the stops in this final section. This section is essentially a repeat of our first section, but a lot grander in scale. We now have our cello, bass and some violins playing our initial theme, with our flutes and some clarinets supporting our melodic theme, and some clarinets and bassoons supporting our brass response. Finally, towards the end, we get a definitive resolution, with the strings and brass coming together to play a fully realised ascending line, while our woodwinds tease us by playing a falling triplet pattern borrowed from our initial theme, spanning over 4 octaves. We then have the orchestra truly working together as one, playing a repeating triplet style pattern, while our trombones and horns all play the tonic note on the beginning of each bar. There is, however, one final point of contention at the end, with our woodwinds and strings using chromaticism to create a minor second interval by playing a B flat where our brass is playing an A. Our woodwinds and strings eventually concede to a big finish by moving down to an A. Let's go ahead and consolidate all of that by playing the end of our final section and the outro. So, we've explored how theme can be introduced and orchestrated around a piece, while also touching on some of the differences between Abbey Road ONE Orchestral Foundations and BBCSO Core. Now it's time to show off some of your creations that you've shared using the #OneOrchestra. This is going to be a staple of these videos as we really want to collaborate and highlight with some of the best of our community. So let's jump in. First up, we've got a wonderful piece of music titled Greenwood from Joshua Batch, who composed this all in BBCSO Discover. We've also got another Discover demo, which is a delightful little piece written by Parashini Pathur titled The First Moonray. This piece also features our free labs range and has a little story for you to read while you listen on SoundCloud. Next we have a waltz written by Antonio Eggert using BBCSO Core. There's some lovely dynamics in this one. And finally, Ryan Wood recreates Beethoven's Fifth Symphony using BBCSO Pro. There's some fantastic orchestration going on here. You'll find all of these fantastic composers and their pieces on the demo section of the page, as well as in the links below, alongside my session and MIDI file for this piece. Do get involved by tagging your pieces with the hashtag #OneOrchestra for a chance to appear on the page as well as in these videos. Give us a like if you liked, and let us know what you want to see in these videos as well as on the page in the comments below. Most importantly, don't forget to download the Discover edition of BBC Symphony Orchestra to kick off your composing journey. It's free. It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Take care.